By the time summer reached its hottest breath, Hardin County looked like it had been baked to the color of forgotten clay. Water disappeared from the wells one by one, and the fields curled in on themselves like paper left too close to a flame. All except the Cotter land. Out there, the corn didn't just grow, it towered, stretching nearly 15 feet high, thick as jungle stalks, and so vividly green it almost hurt the eyes. Drivers on Route 7 slowed their engines without meaning to, necks craning as if they expected the plants to whisper back at them. Elias had picked up on things before anyone explained them. The stares at the feed store, the hush that always sank over the room the moment his father stepped through the door, the way the wives, trying to look polite, clutched their handbags just a little too close to their ribs. He'd heard their murmurs slip between conversations like snakes in the grass, words like wrong and unnatural carrying his family's name on their backs. "Folks will always talk," his mother said once, her elbows deep in dough, her voice so tired it barely held shape. "Let the land speak louder than they do." But Elias had learned early that the land wasn't the only thing speaking. There was something else, a heaviness inside the house that never lifted, not even on clear days. Sometimes it felt like the walls were breathing with it, the floors humming with something old and unsettled. His father walked as if he carried that weight beneath his skin. His mother wore it in the new silver strands that had crept through her hair long before her time, in the way she would drift toward the kitchen window and stare at the massive field with an expression that hollowed Elias out from the inside. And always, there was the silence around Gideon. Gideon had been 17 when he went away. That was the phrase everyone used. Went away. As if he'd simply taken a job in another town and forgotten to call home. But Elias remembered the morning it happened. He had woken the day after his 9th birthday to the sound of his mother's sobs. She was bent over the kitchen table as if trying to fold herself into it. His father stood near the screen door, rigid, ghost pale, staring at something far beyond the yard. "Your brother's gone to do important things," his father said. But the words felt like a door slamming shut rather than opening. And then nothing. No letters. No calls. The room Gideon slept in remained untouched, as if he were still expected back for supper. The baseball glove still dangled from the bedpost. The adventure novel he never finished gathered dust on the nightstand. Some nights, when dawn was just beginning to tint the sky purple, Elias heard his mother whispering softly inside that room, speaking to someone who was no longer there. But they never talked about him, not really. His name became a quiet shape in the house, something everyone stepped around but no one allowed themselves to touch. 3 years passed like that. 3 years of his mother flinching whenever a wind swept through the corn. 3 years of his father glancing toward the towering stalks during dinner, his fork paused midair like he'd heard a voice calling him. And then one August morning, long before the sun had risen, Elias woke to find his father standing in the doorway of his bedroom, his silhouette sharp and still, as though carved from the same dry earth that surrounded the county. His father's voice was low, strained. "Come with me," he said. "Your brother's work, it's time you understood it." His father didn't knock or cough or clear his throat. He simply stepped into the doorway at dawn and said, in a voice that left no room for questions, "It's time you learned." Before Elias could wipe the sleep from his eyes, they were already moving through the rows. The sky behind them was shifting from night's ink to a deep, bruised violet. Every leaf they brushed whispered against his arms, dry and whisper thin, as if the plants themselves were murmuring warnings he wasn't yet meant to understand. The day's heat was already waking up, thick enough to taste. But inside the Cotter cornfield, the air changed. It wasn't cooler, not exactly, but it felt older. Like the field belonged to a different season, a different century, maybe even a different world entirely. His father walked ahead without looking back. Each step was steady, crushing the soil with a certainty that came from generations of doing the same thing. Abner Cotter wasn't tall, but he carried himself like someone who had never once feared the dark. His hands, scarred from decades of work, always reminded Elias of two trades that made no sense together, someone who heals and someone who buries. Do you know why our corn grows like this, Elias? No warning, no gentle lead-in. The question came sharp as a blade. Elias hurried to keep up. Because the soil's good, he answered automatically. Because Grandpa built the drainage right. Because we know things other folks don't. That was the story of Nur, always fed to the agricultural officers, who showed up with clipboards and suspicion. His father halted so suddenly that Elias nearly ran into him. The stalks around them rose like green walls, cutting off the house, the barn, the road, the entire world. Elias felt as though they were standing inside a living cathedral. That's what we tell people, his father said. Then his gaze dropped to Elias, steady and unblinking. But what do you believe? The question struck deep. It felt like a stone disappearing into deep water, sinking past everything Elias thought he understood. He thought of the strange looks at the feed store, the fear hidden behind polite nods. He thought of his mother staring at this very field with something like dread hollowing her eyes. He thought of Gideon's quiet room, frozen in time. I don't know, Elias whispered. The truth tasted like giving up. Abner placed a hand on his son's shoulder, warm, heavy, anchoring. That's the right answer for now. Better to admit not knowing than to pretend wrongly. He turned and pushed deeper into the corn. Our family has lived on this land longer than any map has bothered marking it, he said. Before the county had its name, before the first fence, before there was anyone to tell us what ought to grow here. The stalks crowding around them grew thicker, taller, as if the field sensed where they were going. Elias had to turn sideways to squeeze through narrow gaps. The leaves slapped at his arms, leaving thin red trails that burned in the damp air. When I was your age, Abner said, voice low but steady, my father brought me out here too, and his father took him before that. Each generation is told the same thing on the same path through this same field. The rows began to shift almost imperceptibly, guiding them somewhere Elias had never seen, somewhere the family never talked about, a place the corn seemed to guard. And now, Abner said, stepping into a clearing Elias didn't know existed, it's your turn to hear what's been waiting for you. That's how it's always been, Elias, how it must be. What way? Elias asked, but his father only lifted a hand, directing his gaze forward. The corn ended abruptly, like a curtain pulled back. Before them lay a perfect circle cut into the heart of the field, 30 feet wide, carved with a precision that made Elias' skin prickle. The earth inside it was darker than anything he'd seen on the farm, nearly black, damp looking, as if the soil was drinking something it could never get enough of. In the very center stood a wooden cross, tall enough to scrape the brightening sky. And hanging from it was the reason every kid in Hardin County lowered their voices when the Cotter scarecrow was mentioned. Elias had expected rags stuffed with straw, maybe an old shirt, a painted grin like the ones he'd seen in other fields. This was none of that. At first, he thought it was a man. The shape was too real, too heavy, tattoo proportioned like someone who could step down from the cross at any moment. The burlap binding it wasn't the pale, cheerful wheat color farmers usually used. It was dark and mottled, the shade of dried spills on old butcher paper. Layer after layer was wrapped around the figure, tight enough that the impression of shoulders, ribs, even the faint curve of a bowed head pushed through. But it was the smell that made Elias freeze. A sour human smell. A smell that reminded him of sick rooms, of something living slipping toward something else. Hot earth, slow decay, and something metallic beneath it all, a scent he recognized without wanting to. His father stepped closer to the cross, voice dropping low. "Birds aren't fooled by scarecrows made of shirts and straw," he murmured. "Crows are smarter than most folks give them credit for. They know what's real. They know what is." The breeze stirred just then, low and breathy, and the figure on the cross shifted ever so slightly. Elias' pulse jumped. Whether it moved on its own or the wind carried it, he couldn't tell, but it felt aware. Somewhere deep in the corn, a crow cried out, a hard, scraping sound that made Elias' skin pebble. There was meaning in that call. Something sharp and knowing, as if the bird understood exactly what stood in this clearing. Elias swallowed. Then what scares them? His father turned. For the first time, Elias truly saw how much age had carved itself into the lines of his father's face. The sun had not caused those grooves. Worry had. Secrets had. "The dying of Narrated." Elias' heart thudded once hard. "A dead man," Abner continued quietly. "Crows will strip him to bone without hesitation. Death doesn't frighten them, but someone who's close to death is someone whose spirit is slipping but hasn't let go yet." He shook his head slowly. "That's different. They can sense the last spark in a person. That stubborn will that refuses to go out. It unsettles them, makes them keep their distance." Elias stared at the bound figure as another gust whispered through the circle. And in that moment, just for a heartbeat, it seemed to lean forward, almost relieved, as if recognizing him. The sun finally lifted itself over the horizon, spilling soft gold and rose across the clearing, light far too gentle for what stood before Elias. For a fleeting second, the scene looked almost peaceful. Then the sunlight touched the burlap, and the burlap moved. Not from the wind, from breath. A slow, steady rise, a slow, steady fall. "No," the words slipped out of Elias without meaning, without thought, just instinct recoiling from something that should not be. His father didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn knife, its bone handle smoothed by decades of work, its blade flashing like morning frost. He pressed it into Elias' shaking hand. "Cut it open," Abner said softly. "You need to see." Elias' fingers curled weakly around the handle, the metal trembling as he raised it. Each motion felt like moving underwater. He barely remembered leaning forward. He barely remembered touching the blade to the burlap. But he remembered how easily it split. The fabric peeled back in brittle strips, drifting down like dark, dusty petals. Beneath it lay scraps of clothing so decayed they clung to the body like wet paper, and under those, flesh, living flesh. Elias froze mid-cut, the knife hanging in the air like an accusation. The figure's chest rose again, sank again, unmistakably alive. The throat pulsed with the faintest rhythm. The ribs pressed just under the skin like branches pressing against snow. He wasn't looking at a scarecrow. He was looking at someone still trapped in the slow machinery of dying. The skin was sun-hardened and leathery, stretched thin over a frame that seemed half-starved, half-mummified. The lips had cracked so severely they looked stitched with pain. Teeth showed through them like old fence posts. The eyelids, thin as paper, twitched with dreams no living person should carry. But it wasn't the body that shattered Elias. It was the face. Wrong, yes, distorted by time and torment, but familiar. Too familiar. His stomach lurched. The world went sideways. He grabbed the wooden beam of the cross to keep from collapsing. Gideon. He didn't mean to say it. It came out as barely a breath, a ghost of a name. But the figure heard. Its eyelids fluttered once, twice, then slowly dragged open. Elias remembered those eyes from summers spent chasing fireflies, from muddy laughter by the creek, from the brother who used to lift him onto his shoulders. Gideon's eyes had once been the brilliant summer sky blue their mother carried. Now they were a sickly yellow one, hollow and clouded, but still aware enough to find his brother standing there. Recognition burned through the ruin. The lips tried to move. Cracked skin split further. A faint rasp escaped, no longer language but still shaped by memory. Something struggling to return to words after years of forgetting how. Then clearer. Barely a whisper, but unmistakable. Run. The voice of a brother who should have been dead. The voice of someone who wasn't allowed to die. And the weight of the field seemed to lean closer, listening. The words scraped out of Gideon like they were clawing through broken glass, each syllable a final act of defiance. His ruined lips barely formed the shape, but the meaning struck like lightning. Run! The plea shuddered from him again, ragged and raw. Elias didn't move. He couldn't. The world had narrowed to the nightmare hanging from that cross, his brother's face collapsing in on itself, his brother's eyes burning with terror he didn't have the strength to hide. Then his father's hands came down on his shoulders, steady, guiding, turning him away. Elias felt the knife slip from his numb fingers and bury itself in the dark soil with a soft thud. But he still couldn't tear his gaze from Gideon. Every detail carved itself into his mind. The places where the sun had carved deep cracks in skin that could no longer heal. The patches of raw flesh where birds had dared to test their hunger before retreating. The jutting ribs. The exposed bone along wrists, rubbed raw by rope and weather. The horror wasn't in one wound, but all of them together. A map of suffering etched into a body that had been denied the mercy of dying. His part is over, Abner said quietly beside him. His voice held a gentle certainty, the same tone he used when explaining why calves had to be weaned, or why storms took whole branches from the orchard. He's given everything he could. 3 seasons of abundance. 3 years of keeping this land alive when the rest of the county was turning to ash. Something flickered in his father's expression. Pride, grief, maybe both tangled together the way roots lock beneath the earth. Your grandfather barely lasted 2 seasons, Abner continued. Gideon outlived him, outlasted all of them. Elias' throat tightened until he could barely breathe. His brother, the scarecrow. His brother out here all this time. His brother dying slow so the corn could live. His father saw the panic in his eyes and held him firmly by the arms, not harshly, but with the weight of someone delivering a truth he had carried too long. This isn't something we chose, Abner said. It's something handed down, older than the fence lines, older than the county, older than any of us. Our family keeps the pact because someone must. If we break it, the land dies. And if the land dies, he shook his head weary, we die with it. Behind them, Gideon made a sound, a choked, broken noise that could have been a laugh or a sob. His head leaned sideways against the wooden beam, and his clouded eyes sought Elia's again, desperate and shining with pain. "Told you," Gideon rasped. "No." His father sighed as though hearing an old argument repeated. "He said he wouldn't let you take his place," Abner murmured. "He said it every morning when I came to tend the ropes, fought it harder than any cotter before him, screamed until his throat tore, held his breath until his body forced it back. Every wound that should have freed him healed overnight. He tried everything, Elias. The land wouldn't release him." Gideon's breath rattled like wind in hollow wood. "He woke up every sunrise," Abner continued, voice low. "Still here, still breathing, still keeping the crows back." Your father bent down through the hush of the clearing, picked the fallen knife out of the black soil, and brushed the dirt from its blade as if the next step was already decided. Dragged him out of the shed. Elias saw him only in flashes at first, a pale ankle streaked with dirt, the torn hem of his shirt, the way his fingers twitched weakly in the dust like dying insects. Then Abner lifted Gideon's shoulders, and the full horror came into view. The corn had already taken root in him. Thin, hair-fine tendrils of pale root curled out from the cuts on Gideon's arms and neck, threading into the soil as though the earth were trying to pull him back down. His eyes were open, unfocused, rolling toward Elias with a kind of pleading that had no breath left behind it. "Please," Gideon mouthed. No sound came out. The corn had taken his voice first. Elias stumbled backward, shaking his head, whispering, "No, no, please no, not him. Not Gideon," but the field didn't care. The field had never cared. Abner set Gideon down at the edge of the rows, in that thin strip of raw earth where nothing natural grew anymore. Elias could see the outline of last year's offering there, the way the soil still sagged slightly, as if remembering the shape of a body. "This is the way," Abner said, not unkindly. That was the worst part. Not the violence, not the ritual, but the gentleness in his father's voice, as though all of this were simply part of being alive, the way planting and harvest had always been. Gideon's chest rose once, twice, shallow gasps, like a man trying to breathe through water. The crackling grew louder. It came from all around them now, echoing through the rows. The corn leaned in ever so slightly, a slow, subtle bow, as though welcoming its next meal. Elias couldn't tell if it was the wind or something older, something listening. Abner handed him the knife. Elias didn't take it. His hands hung uselessly at his sides, fingers numb, as if the bones inside them had turned to dust. He stared at the blade, the way sunlight slid across it, bright and cold and absolute, and for the first time in his life he hated the land, hated the roots beneath it and the history above it, hated the blood woven through every harvest his family had ever claimed. "Son," Abner said quietly, "if you don't do it, the corn will." And Elias knew that was true. The corn was patient. It would wait for him to run, to scream, to fall. It always had time. It had centuries behind it. It would gladly take centuries more. Gideon's hand found his wrist. Barely, just enough pressure to feel human. Elias met his eyes. Gideon blinked once, slow, deliberate, and Elias understood. Not forgiveness, not mercy. Just the simple plea to end the suffering the corn would not. Elias reached for the knife. His father nodded once. The field exhaled. "Oh, my boy," she said. The words left her like a breath pushed out of an old wound. She reached for him, not quickly, not desperately, but with the soft, resigned certainty of someone greeting a pain she had known all her life. Her palms rested on his cheeks, thumbs brushing the skin beneath his eyes as if memorizing the shape of him one last time. "You look so much like your grandfather did," she whispered. "The night he tried to fight his way out. The night he realized the fighting only makes the land squeeze tighter." Elias swallowed hard. "Mom." "No," she said, and her voice trembled just once. "No lies today. No pretending. You deserve honesty in your last daylight." She guided him to sit at the old pine table. The wood was scarred, burn-marked, smoothed by countless meals and countless arguments. And once, in the winter he was 8, by his mother's tears when the first signs of the calling began in Gideon. She sat opposite him, hands still holding his as if they were keeping him tethered to the moment. "You have questions," she said quietly. "Ask them. I will not leave this kitchen until you've said every one." He wanted to rage. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her she should have saved him, that she should have run with him, that a mother's love was supposed to be stronger than soil, stronger than tradition, stronger than the roots that had wrapped their family like chains. But he didn't. Because looking at her, really looking, he saw a woman who had already fought those battles, fought them until her bones were weary and her heart was thin as paper. He saw the cost of a lifetime of resistance that had ended in resignation. "Why me?" he whispered. Her fingers tightened. "Because the land chooses, not your father, not me, not even Gideon. The land takes the one who hears it first." "I never heard anything." She shook her head gently. "Oh, my love, you did, just not with your ears." She reached across the table and touched the center of his chest, right where the ache had lived for as long as he could remember, that strange heaviness he had never been able to name. "It started the night you were born," she said. "The wind in the corn went still. Every stalk turned toward the house. The roots shifted deep in the soil. I knew then. The land had marked you." His stomach turned cold. Her eyes softened, grief and tenderness woven together like threads of the same cloth. "I tried bargaining," she murmured. "I tried everything. I prayed until my knees bled. I begged your father to take us away. But the land, it listens only to itself." She brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "Gideon was lucky," she whispered. "He got 12 more years than he should have." A silence settled between them, thick, old as the house, older than the fields. "What happens tonight?" Elias finally asked. Her lip quivered, the first crack in her composure. She reached for a cloth and wiped her hands as if trying to keep herself busy, as if movement might keep her from breaking. "At midnight," she said, voice thin, "the soil opens. Gideon will rise when the land releases him. You will take his place, and the roots will pull you under." Elias felt the room tilt. She came to him again, cradling his head against her stomach the way she had when he was a small child frightened by storms. "I'm so sorry," she breathed into his hair. "I'm so sorry, my boy. I have loved you with everything in me, but love is not enough against old things." Her hands trembled as she held him. "I will stay with you until sunset," she whispered. "After that, your father takes over." Outside, through the window, the corn stirred without wind, a slow, deliberate rustling, like something shifting in its sleep. Waiting, telling him that high school wasn't nearly as scary as it looked, that bullies were just boys who didn't know where to put their fear, that life made more sense once you learned to stand your ground. Elias felt the air thicken with the ghost of those moments. The room didn't smell like dust or abandonment. It smelled lived in, as if Gideon had only stepped outside for a moment. His mother must have tended it every day, straightening sheets, wiping shelves, smoothing curtains, not out of hope, but out of duty. A ritual of mourning stretched across years. His mother stood in the doorway, hands clasped tightly in front of her, twisting the fabric of her apron. He loved this room, she murmured, said it made him feel normal, like the world didn't have its claws in him yet. Elias ran his hand over the bedspread. He never got to come back. No, she said softly, but I needed a place where he still could, even if only in memory. He looked at the model airplanes overhead, their thin wires holding them mid-flight, forever in a loop of imaginary sky. He remembered Gideon making the noises, VRRRMMM, CHKKK, CHKKK, boom, while little Elias laughed so hard he nearly fell off the bed. What was he like at the end? Elias asked without looking up. His mother's breath shuddered. Still Gideon, she said. Still trying to make us laugh. Still trying to make it easier for us. He asked me once if I remembered the time he taught you to swim. You were so small you could barely keep your head above water, but you trusted him. You jumped right in because he held out his hand. Her voice cracked. He said he hoped you'd remember him like that, not as what he became. Elias closed his eyes. The image of Gideon nailed to the cross of weathered boards rose unbidden. His peeling skin, his cracked lips, the way his body had been little more than sacrifice and suffering. He didn't want you to take his place, she whispered. That part that wasn't the lamb, that was Gideon. He begged your father to find another way. Elias turned, staring at her. There was another way. No, she admitted, but he begged anyway. That's who he was. Silence settled again, thick and heavy, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. What happens, Elias asked finally, when they put me up there? When it starts? She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, forcing herself not to crumble. The first night is the longest, she said. Your body will fight. Your mind will fight. You'll feel the land pulling hard, and your blood will feel too hot, and the air will taste like iron, and you'll swear your bones are splitting. She swallowed. That's when you have to choose. Choose what? To stay human, she whispered. Or to give yourself over. Once you give in, it gets easier, too easy. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. Gideon's cracked voice echoed in his memory. Told them no. Said I'd never make you. Did Gideon stay human? Elias asked. Her eyes filled with a grief, so deep it looked ancient. He tried, she said. Every day he tried. Another silence. It was Elias who broke it. I don't want to go back out there. Her face folded, like something inside her had finally lost its ability to hold. I know, she whispered. I know, my sweet summer boy. She came to him again, sat beside him on the bed, and wrapped her arms around him. He let his head rest on her shoulder the way he had when he was small, as if he could crawl backward through time into a world where monsters were just shadows and cornfields were just plains. The minutes passed quietly. Then a distant sound drifted through the open window, a slow, rhythmic creaking. The wooden cross shifting under the weight of a dying brother. His mother stiffened. It's starting. Elias lifted his head, dread washing over him like cold water. What time is it? He asked. Sunset, she whispered. Your father will be here soon. Her voice broke. We should go downstairs. Fat and orange over the horizon, spilling its dull, heavy glow across the fields that had claimed everything he loved. The house behind him had gone quiet, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Elias stepped outside. The heat of the day still clung to the wooden porch, but the air had taken on a thickness, a weight that settled on his skin like damp cloth. Somewhere far out in the rows, a single stalk creaked. Another answered. The corn was shifting, stretching, waking. It knew what hour this was. He clutched Gideon's notebook tighter. The pages still smelled faintly of his brother, ink and sweat and something else. Something like fear baked into the paper. The last line burned in his mind. God help him. God help us all. Elias whispered into the night, I'm sorry, Guy. The screen door groaned behind him. His father stepped out, the lantern in his hand making his shadow long and thin across the porch floorboards. His face was calm, too calm. The calm of someone who had buried pieces of himself so deep he no longer felt their absence. Time, Abner said. Elias didn't argue. Somewhere in his mother's room, a muffled sob drifted through the dark, quickly stifled. She wasn't allowed to come. She wasn't allowed to save him. The land saw to that. They walked into the field. The corn parted for Abner as if it recognized him. For Elias, it resisted, brushing against his cheeks, tapping his arms, tugging lightly at his shirt. Like a living thing, like fingers. The clearing appeared suddenly, a hollow in the green, and at its center, the cross. Gideon still hung there. Only he wasn't Gideon anymore. Not really. His yellowed eyes had gone glassy. His chest barely rose. The skin around his lips had cracked so far it looked like the smile of a carved pumpkin left too long in the sun. But he saw Elias. Something flickered behind those ruined eyes. Don't, Gideon mouthed again, voice too broken to carry. Run. Elias took a step forward, every breath shaking. His father moved with him, steady and ritualistic. He placed the lantern at the foot of the cross. The flame sputtered, casting wavering shadows across Gideon's ravaged body. Abner's voice came soft, almost reverent. At midnight, the land releases one and takes another. Your brother's work is done. Gideon's fingers twitched. He doesn't look released, Elias whispered. Abner didn't answer. He reached for the rope, the same rope he had used 3 years ago, the same rope his own father had used before him. The moon overhead seemed to pulse. The air thickened further, swallowing the sounds of the world. No wind, no insects, no heartbeat except Elias' own, pounding like a trapped animal inside his chest. Gideon's breath rattled. Elias, he rasped, the word barely shaped, barely human. Elias stepped closer. I'm here. Don't let them. The rest dissolved into a sound too broken to be language. Abner climbed the small ladder propped against the cross. He reached for the first knot. The rope shivered. Not from Abner's hand, from Gideon. A low, sick crackle echoed through the clearing like branches snapping under snow. Gideon's spine arched. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Something moved beneath his skin, a ripple, a tightening, a final monstrous effort to hold on. The corn rustled all around them, though no wind touched it. Elias whispered, Dad, what's happening? Abner didn't look down. The land doesn't like to let go. But he's still. He's finished, Abner said, voice hardening. It only fights like this when it knows the next one is ready. Elias' blood ran cold. The final knot came undone. Gideon fell forward. Abner caught him by the shoulders as if he were nothing more than a sack of grain. Elias' breath seized in his throat. His brother hung limp, bones sharp beneath wasted skin. But the eyes, those ruined yellow eyes, stayed locked on Elias. One last time. Run, they said without sound. Then something inside Gideon gave out completely. The last flicker of him vanished like a candle in wind. His head dropped. Abner turned, his face solemn. "Help me carry him." Elias didn't move. He couldn't. Because behind his father, behind the cross, something else was happening. The wood was twisting. The ropes were stretching downward, unwinding themselves like serpents. The whole structure was waiting. An emptiness shaped exactly like a human body yawned open, hungry, patient, ancient. The air pulsed again. The corn around him straightened. Something in the earth sighed. "Elias," his father said quietly, "it's time." The cross stood open, waiting. Moonlight glinting off the damp soil, the endless green walls of corn, the knife still warm in his father's hands. He swallowed, trying to keep the bile from rising, trying to keep the fear from freezing him where he stood. "I'm ready," he said, and the words sounded smaller than he felt, but he meant them. Abner nodded once, heavy and deliberate. The corn around them swayed as if acknowledging the moment, whispering secrets in the windless night. Elias followed his father's lead, stepping toward the cross, each footfall a measured drumbeat in the stillness. The clearing felt alive, expectant, watching. Every rustle of stalks, every faint crack from the soil beneath, seemed magnified in the tension of the night. Abner positioned the ropes with meticulous care. The same motions that had bound Gideon 3 years ago now being repeated with Elias. The ropes wrapped around his wrists and ankles, biting into skin and bone, reminding him of the weight of inheritance, the lineage of suffering passed down like a dark blessing. He could hear his own heartbeat thrumming in his ears, could feel the dry brush of corn leaves against his arms, the smell of earth, of rock, of old leather lingering where Gideon had lain. "Focus," Abner said softly, almost a whisper. "Remember what you carry. Remember why we do this." His father's eyes, steady and unflinching, held Elias in place, a tether stronger than any rope. Elias looked once more at Gideon, his brother's face already pale, the last sparks of awareness flickering in yellowed eyes, and nodded. The apology, the sorrow, all the words unsaid, hung suspended between them. Then the cross loomed before him. The wood smelled of earth and weather, familiar yet terrifying. Elias took a deep breath, felt the heat of the land pressing against his chest, felt the invisible pull that had kept the cotters bound for generations. He stepped forward, lifted his feet onto the lower rung, and let Abner guide him into place. The ropes tightened. The burlap brushed against his shoulders. The clearing seemed to exhale. The moon cast its orange glow across the scene, illuminating the thin line between life and sacrifice. Elias' father's hands moved with precision, steady and relentless, the same hands that had once held Gideon down, now preparing Elias for what must come. Elias closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that instant he could feel the weight of generations, the gaze of the land itself, the silent voices of all those who had come before him. Then the ropes pulled taut. He hung there, suspended, a living promise to the soil beneath. "Remember," Abner's voice was calm, impossibly calm. "You are the bridge. The land requires it, Elias, and you will endure." Above him, the corn leaned slightly inward, watching, waiting. Somewhere deep in the field, a faint, familiar crackling began, the sound of life moving, of the land responding, of growth fueled by sacrifice. Elias opened his eyes, braced himself, and for the first time understood what it truly meant to be bound to this place. The night was alive, the land was awake, and the ritual had begun. The darkness stretched and thickened around him like water, the moonlight glinting off the rough ropes and the polished wood of the cross. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint rustle of corn leaves whispering against each other. Every sound seemed amplified. A crow calling somewhere far off, the skitter of some small creature in the undergrowth, his own ragged breaths. Elias' body ached already, muscles stiff from being hoisted onto the cross. His wrists burned where the rope dug in. His legs trembled from the strain of holding himself upright. But worse than the pain was the waiting, the unbearable, eternal waiting. He thought of Gideon and the notebook he had clutched earlier. Every entry, every scratch of pen on paper, every desperate line of survival pressed into his mind like a warning he could not ignore. The first night is the hardest, his father had said. He understood now. Time lost meaning. Minutes dragged, stretching into hours that smelled of earth and sweat and inevitability. The corn seemed to lean closer, shifting in ways that were almost conscious, as if it were alive and watching him, weighing him, measuring him. The breeze that whispered across the field carried no relief, only the promise that the crows would come. Elias closed his eyes and imagined the sun rising over the farm. His mother in the doorway, her hand pressed to the screen, her face pale but steady. He thought of her voice, soft and unwavering, telling him to endure, telling him it was necessary. He tried to memorize it, to store it somewhere deep, because he knew he might not hear it again for a long time. The first sound of wings came well before dawn. A single crow, then another, until the air was thick with movement. They circled, low and deliberate, their black eyes calculating, patient. The cross trembled slightly under Elias' weight. He tensed, muscles coiled, ready for what would come. The birds landed. One by one, they alighted on the crossbar, their claws tapping against wood. Their eyes locked on him, unblinking, sharp, alive. And in that moment, Elias understood the meaning of the words his father had spoken, the force of your dying. He lifted his chin, forced his chest forward, and met their gaze. He shouted, a raw, hoarse sound that shook the clearing. The crows flinched, but they did not leave. They tested him as they had tested Gideon. And Elias fought with every ounce of himself, his fear, his pain, his memories, and held them back. The night dragged on, unending, a test of endurance, of will. The moon moved across the sky, casting long, shifting shadows over the field. Elias' hands bled where the ropes rubbed raw. His throat was sore from screaming. His lungs burned with every breath, and yet he did not falter. Somewhere deep in the corn, the world continued, indifferent, ancient, patient. And above him, the first pale fingers of dawn stretched over Hardin County. Elias still clung to the cross, still fighting, still alive. The ritual had begun, and he was living proof that the land's hunger was not absolute. But even as the sun rose, Elias knew the truth. The struggle had only just begun. The land itself, for choosing him, for binding him before he even knew he was alive. The heat pressed harder, the ropes bit deeper, and still, Elias held onto that fire. His fists clenched, his teeth ground, and he let the crows feel it, the pulse of something human still raging beneath the leathered skin and frayed bonds. Every snap of a stalk, every pop of growing cells felt like a challenge thrown at him, and he met it. With every heartbeat, he drew on memories he hadn't thought of in years. Gideon showing him how to throw a ball, his mother's lullabies, the smell of fresh-turned soil. They became armor, keeping the terror at bay. The sun climbed higher, relentless, and the birds tested him, hopping closer, pecking near, watching, calculating. Each time they came, he screamed, shouted, thrashed, forcing them back. Each time he learned the rhythm the patience required, the endurance the land demanded. It was not just a fight for survival. It was a lesson, a brutal inheritance of the family. handed down in sweat, blood, and silent suffering. Hours stretched into days, days into weeks. Elias counted only in the small victories. One bird held at bay, one rope less chafing, one breath survived without panic. And somewhere inside him, buried beneath the fear, the sorrow, the anger, a quiet certainty grew. He would endure. He would meet the land's impossible expectations, not because he wanted to, but because this was what it meant to be Cotter. The corn continued to grow, and the sun burned, and the crows circled and landed, relentless, patient, eternal. And through it all, Elias survived, each moment a testament to stubborn human will, to the defiance of a 12-year-old boy forced to confront a fate older than memory, yet somehow terrifyingly still his own. The wind stirred the corn in slow, deliberate waves, whispering secrets only the field could understand. Elias hung on the cross, 12 years old, but forged by 3 relentless summers and winters that had chewed through flesh and will alike. His body ached with memory, every nerve screaming with the weight of generations. Yet inside him, a fire burned brighter than the fear pressing in from every side. A single crow hopped forward, black eyes glinting with ancient cunning, its beak pointed, sharp and deliberate, and Elias let loose a cry, not the cry of a frightened boy, but a roar that carried centuries of rage and defiance. It was raw, primal, a howl of every soul that had ever hung here before him. The crow recoiled, wings snapping through the air. One, then a dozen more erupted from the crossbar in a storm of feathers and frantic caws, retreating to the edge of the corn with careful respect. The first trial was done, one small victory, but Elias knew there would be more. Each dawn would bring the same challenge, each sunset a tally of survival measured in heartbeats and shivers of exhaustion. The corn loomed around him, impossibly green and full, indifferent to the boy who gave his life to sustain it. Years blurred, seasons folded into one another. 3 harvests passed before the sound of a hesitant footstep broke through the morning quiet. At the edge of the clearing, a boy appeared, pale, wide-eyed, trembling. Elias' sun-darkened eyes took him in slowly, and memory stirred like a ghost. He saw the same terror he had once worn, the same innocence shredded by the field and its unrelenting hunger. Behind the boy, Abner stepped out, older, grayer, every line on his face a map of endurance and grim duty. "This is your cousin," Abner said, his voice steady but heavy with history. "Josiah, your aunt married into the family. He turns 12 this week. Time he learned what it means." Josiah's gaze locked on Elias, horror frozen in its rawest form. And Elias remembered the reflection of his own fear at that age, the weight of the cross, the relentless crows, the hot, suffocating pressure of the field waiting to claim him. "The crows don't fear straw," Abner began again, words polished by repetition, sharp as the blade he carried. "They know, they always know. The living can drive them away, the dying cannot." Elias rasped a sound, a croak more than speech, but Josiah heard it, the warning wrapped in pain and survival. The boy's lips went white. Elias had become a ghost and a sentinel in one. His body bore the scars of frost, the cruelty of sun, the sharp teeth of wind and hunger. 3 long years had stripped him of voice, of feeling in fingers and toes, yet here he stood, proof of endurance, proof of the land's claim, proof of the strength to pass it forward. Josiah shivered, knowing he would soon take his place in this brutal lineage. And Elias, staring at the new fear mirrored in the boy's eyes, understood something terrible and profound. This was the rhythm of their family. The corn demanded its children, and those who survived became both teachers and ghosts, bound to a cycle older than memory, hungering for the lives that fed it. The clearing fell silent again, the crows watching from the shadows, waiting, and the wind moved through the stalks as if to whisper, "The lesson begins anew." The field groaned softly under the afternoon sun, each towering stalk bending like it had secrets to hide. Elias felt every gust of wind as a shiver along the ropes that held him, each breath scraping through a throat that barely remembered how to work. 3 years on the cross had carved the boy out of him and left something harder, thinner, but unbroken. He saw Josiah stiffen at the base of the clearing, fear trembling through him like a snapped wire. Elias remembered that feeling too well. The moment the world shrinks to one impossible truth, there is no escape. And yet he tried to give the boy what little mercy he had left to offer. "Run!" It wasn't a word anymore, just a rasp, a ghost of sound. But Josiah heard it. Shock raced across the boy's face. Then he spun, tore into the corn with desperate steps, vanishing into the maze of green. For one fleeting heartbeat, Elias let himself imagine the boy breaking through the field, sprinting free into a world that had never belonged to their bloodline. But hope was a fragile thing here. Abner didn't even shift his weight. "Let him go," he murmured, voice steady as old stone. "They all come back. The land knows its own." For years, Elias had watched that face, stern, immovable, but now, for an instant, it cracked open. Grief pooled in the lines around Abner's eyes, something human slipping through the hardened mask. "You lasted longer than any of us expected," his father said quietly. 3 winters, 3 thaws, that's when most lose their grip." His hand brushed the wood beside Elias' shoulder, a gesture so gentle it almost hurt. "Your mother wants you to know she loves you. She's proud of the strength you've shown." Elias blinked once, slow, deliberate, hoping the message reached whatever part of his father could still receive it. "When the moon comes up," Abner continued, "we'll bring the boy back, and your watch will end. Rest." The thought felt distant, as if it belonged to another life. Elias tried to picture silence without the rustle of wings, darkness without the glint of watching eyes, a night without the sharp sting of beaks testing how close he was to the end. It all felt unreal, like a story someone else had lived and forgotten. But the ropes would come off tonight. He would stand, if only for a moment, and feel the soil that had claimed him the moment he was born. Like Gideon before him, he would have a few stolen hours between the cross and the grave, a narrow slice of peace carved out of a lifetime of pain. Not enough, never enough, but it was something. The sun drifted westward in its slow, eternal arc. Shadows stretched long across the clearing. On the far edge, the crows gathered, black shapes lined like judges waiting for the verdict they already knew. They had waited through 3 years of storms, winters, and scorching summers. They could wait a little longer. Elias let his weary gaze sweep over the field one last time. The corn towered higher than he'd ever seen it, 15 feet, maybe more, heavy with the weight of harvest, shimmering in the warm breeze. Those shimmering stalks meant survival for his family. Another winter, another planting, another cycle. The corn thrived. It always did. And it always demanded a price. Him, her hands trembling as they brushed against his face. "You've done what none before you could. You've held the line. You fed the land with your life, and still you endure." Elias let the words wash over him like a distant tide, a warmth he hadn't known in years. The ropes were gone. The crows had retreated to the shadowed edges of the field, and the corn whispered softly as if acknowledging his survival. For the first time in an eternity, he felt the weight of the world lift just slightly, replaced with a fragile, fleeting relief. Josiah stumbled into view, panting, the last of his futile escape, eyes wide with both terror and awe. Elias watched him, the boy's fear a mirror of his own long-ago horror, and for a moment he understood the cruel continuity of it all. One generation endured so the next could learn. One spark of defiance, one heartbeat of resistance, before the cycle inevitably claimed the children again. Abner's voice cut through the night air, soft but firm. "It's done for now. Rest. Remember this, the land is patient, but it notices. You've earned these hours, Elias. Do not waste them." Elias turned his gaze upward, seeing the moon spill silver light across the field, washing over the endless green, over the scars of all who had come before him. The corn rose tall and heavy, each stalk a monument to the cost of life here. Somewhere in its roots and soil, the old hunger waited, patient as eternity itself. But tonight, for the first night in years, the land would not touch him. His mother's hands lingered on his shoulders, grounding him in the sensation of warmth and presence. "Sleep, my boy," she whispered. "Let the night hold you. Let it remind you that you are still here, still breathing, still whole." And for a moment, a brief, fragile heartbeat between the terror and the inevitability, Elias allowed himself to believe it. The night air kissed his skin, the soft rustle of the corn became a lullaby, and the crows remained distant watchers, forced to wait. Tomorrow the cycle would continue, but tonight he was free. Just for a while he was free. "Him, my brave, my child of summers past," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the night. He could not speak, hadn't spoken for countless moons, but his hand rose slowly, trembling, and brushed against hers. She grasped it, warm and solid, and for a heartbeat, the weight of years and sorrow fell away, leaving only a fleeting memory of safety and love. Beyond them, Josiah was being guided to the cross. The boy had stopped struggling. They always ceased their fight eventually, resignation settling into their faces like dust. Elias knew that expression too well, the look of one who had learned the truth, the one who understood the ropes could not be undone, that dawn would summon the crows, that life here was no longer counted in days, but in seasons measured by the land's demands. That was Josiah's burden now. Elias' own ordeal had almost run its course. "Rest, my son," his mother murmured, fingers tracing his brow with a gentleness that belied the scars of grief. "You have earned this, truly you have." Elias let his eyelids fall, surrendering to a sleep he had not known in years. Above him, the faint creak of ropes, the scrape of wood, and the soft whimpers of a new child learning the rhythm of the cross played a quiet symphony of inevitability. This was the pattern of their world. It had always been so. It would always be so. The corn whispered around them in the night breeze. Somewhere, a lone crow cried, a note sharp and ancient, carrying the hunger and memory of centuries. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from his chest, the merciful release of the body and mind yielding, the relentless torment finally loosening its grip. Morning came in a blaze of red and gold, spilling across the field, igniting the corn's tall stalks, bending heavy with grain and promise. In the center, the wooden cross stood stark against the brightening sky. A boy clung to it, motionless, lips moving in silent prayers or curses. Above him, the crows circled in precise spirals, patient watchers of the fragile spark of life. At the base of the cross, the soil was dark, fertile, and complete. It had consumed the sacrifice of the night before, drawing it deep into the earth. The boy who had kept the crows at bay for 3 long years was gone, but his life, his struggle, fed the land still. The land remembered as it always did, even when all else forgot. In the quiet of the clearing, the corn crackled and popped, stretching higher, thriving on the remnants of a life surrendered. And if one had been near enough to press an ear to the earth at the base of that ancient cross, perhaps they would have heard the faintest pulse, the whisper of sacrifice, and understood that some debts echo forever, carried upward through stalks, wind, and sun, never ending, always remembered. And beneath the relentless crackle of the corn, something else pulsed, a fragile heartbeat, weak and deliberate yet steady. It beat in sync with the ancient rhythm of the soil, a stubborn testament to life clinging where it should have faltered. Still fighting, still resisting, still holding the crows at bay, a quiet defiance woven into the very veins of the land itself. Story 2, The Lucid Therapy. Emmeline was at the breakfast table, spoon frozen midair, when her face began to melt, slipping as if gravity had betrayed her own skin. David Kellner froze too, heart pounding, senses screaming that something was catastrophically wrong, and only later would he understand the full cost of the mistake he was about to make. But before that, there were months of therapy, months after the divorce, months spent hollowing himself out until all that remained was the desperate need to see his daughter's face one more time. To understand what went wrong that morning, we have to rewind to the very first session. The first time David returned to the house on Palmetto Drive when the simulation worked properly, when nothing felt broken except the weight of his child in his arms. He sat reclined in the Meridian Wellness Center in Tampa, the cool haptic sensors pressed to his temples, eyes closed, waiting. Darkness yielded to memory as the virtual house assembled itself around him. Phoebe, the VR technician, spoke softly, her voice measured, carefully tempered to soothe grief-stricken minds. Your brain does most of the work. We just give it permission to remember, permission, as though grief could be stamped and filed. The living room appeared first, the sectional sofa, rust-colored and sagging in all the right places, the coffee table marred with rings from cups never given coasters, the sliding glass doors that opened to the screened lanai, where lizards enacted their silent territorial wars. The fidelity of it all made his chest tight. He could see the indentation in the carpet where the old TV stand had been, the basket of toys abandoned in the corner. The stuffed elephant, one ear threadbare, the chipped plastic tea set, coloring books with pages warped and ink-stained, every detail a needle in his heart. And then she came. Emmeline burst from the hallway that led to the bedrooms, her tiny feet slapping the tile. Strawberry blonde hair escaped the neat pigtails Ruth always tied. She wore the yellow sundress with embroidered daisies, sunlight somehow stitched into the fabric. She came running straight toward him, a perfect memory animated with the scent of summer mornings and the careless joy of a child who had no inkling of tragedy. David's chest constricted. He could feel the weight of 7 months of absence and regret pressing down, the emptiness of every day he had not held her. And in that perfect, impossible moment, he understood the dangerous truth. This world, this lucid therapy, was too real. It could heal, yes, but it could also consume. The spoon slipped from his hand. The room tilted, and Emmeline's face began to distort. And then it happened. The scream, the gravity of his era, the realization that what he had thought was solace might be something far more sinister. The line between memory and simulation, past and present, began to blur. And in the center of it all, David Kellner could only reach for her, powerless, knowing that the therapy meant to bring her back might just erase everything he thought he knew about reality. The morning was supposed to be ordinary, but in the Meridian Wellness Center, ordinary was the first casualty. She came barreling toward him, arms flailing, her little legs carrying the unstoppable momentum of 6 years of unspent energy. The dress she had begged for at the mall, the one she had refused to change for 3 whole days, swirled around her like sunlight caught in fabric. "Daddy," she shouted, voice ringing with unrestrained joy. the kind of joy that hasn't yet learned the weight of disappointment. David felt the impact in his chest before his brain could catch up. The haptic sensors hummed against his skin, translating her hug into a pressure that brushed the edges of reality. She felt lighter than flesh and bone, almost like smoke given form, but it was enough. Close enough for him to shut his eyes and imagine that he was holding her for real. "I'm home, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice trembling under the weight of longing. "I'm home." The sessions were never meant to last this long. Only 45 minutes, 3 times a week. Dr. Castellanos had reminded him with that careful, clinical tone behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "Lucid therapy is meant to help you process loss, Mr. Kellner, not to replace life itself. Too much, too often, and it can trap you between memory and reality. The goal is integration, not immersion." David had nodded then, signing the forms without reading the fine print, because what did it matter? He would have agreed to anything. Sold his house, emptied his bank account, traded his own time. Anything to reach her again. Anything to hear her laugh, to see her curl into his arms like she used to. Ruth had quit coming after 3 weeks. She had stood at the threshold of his study, that small refuge he claimed after the funeral, the room where he slept on the pull-out couch to avoid the hollow ache of their bed. "You're not visiting her, David," she said, exhaustion and grief twisting every syllable. "You're visiting a machine made to look like her. That's not the same." He had turned back to the screen, the flicker of old home videos casting shadows across his face. Each frame was cataloged, measured, scanned, uploaded into the Meridian system so he could feed the simulation every scrap of reality he remembered. Because in that world he could hold her. He could hear her laugh. He could read bedtime stories and feel the soft press of her fingers against his. And here he could only stare at emptiness, sort through her clothes for charity. Pretend that the absence meant something. Ruth's expression had shifted then, and David remembered it like a physical blow. Layers of pain, fury, and exhaustion moving across her face, reshaping it. Her room isn't empty, David. Her memory isn't empty. I'm not empty. But you've cut yourself off. You can't see it anymore, can you? He had no answer. There was nothing to say. He could only reach, only grasp at the ephemeral, only let the simulation give him a fraction of what reality had stolen. And yet, in that fraction, he found a heartbeat, a little, defiant pulse of connection, one he would chase, session after session, memory after memory, until he could no longer tell where his grief ended and the illusion began. She had told him that he didn't see anything anymore, unless it existed inside that glowing headset. And then she was gone. 3 months later, she packed her things, moved back to Gainesville, and the divorce papers showed up on his doorstep like another unwanted reminder of the world he no longer cared to live in. David signed them with the same mechanical detachment he used to sign delivery receipts. His marriage, his home, his life, they had all become background noise to the only thing that mattered: the chair, the visor, and the digital ghost of his daughter waiting for him inside. Reality felt like a holding cell, a dimly lit corridor he trudged through between sessions, forcing his body to eat, sleep, breathe, just enough to survive until he could lie down, close his eyes, and step back into the place where Emmeline still existed. The first cracks showed up in month 7, barely noticeable at first, a glitch in the way she turned her head, a hiccup in her voice that made her repeat a word too perfectly, like an echo chasing itself. During a debrief, he mentioned it to Phoebe. She frowned, tapped a few notes into her tablet, and gave him a reassuring nod. Sometimes the neural maps blend too tightly with the hardware. It can create tiny visual or vocal anomalies. I'll let the tech team know. But the tiny anomalies didn't fade. They grew teeth. One morning, David found himself sitting at the kitchen counter of the old Palmetto Drive house, watching Emmeline devour her breakfast with the same enthusiasm she'd always had. Too much milk, soggy cereal, messy grin. And then it started. At first he thought the lighting had changed, or maybe he blinked too long. But no, her cheeks were sinking, draining of color, collapsing inward like fragile paper losing shape. Her eyes darkened, dipping deeper into her skull, and for a fraction of a heartbeat her entire face shifted, as if some other shape beneath her skin was fighting to take over. His throat tight, his heartbeat slamming against his ribs. She looked up instantly, perfect, bright, normal again. A dribble of milk on her chin, those curious blue eyes studying his face. "Yeah, Daddy," she chirped, cheerful as ever. David forced his mouth into something like a smile, forced his fingers to release their death grip on the counter, forced himself to nod as if nothing had just tried crawling through his daughter's face. "Nothing, sweetheart. Go on, finish eating." But he didn't take his eyes off her, not for a second. Dr. Castellanos reacted differently when he brought it up. She listened without interrupting, hands folded neatly in her lap, the tastefully decorated office arranged around her like a stage set designed to look comforting. When he finished describing every flicker, every collapse, every impossible distortion, she paused, choosing her words with careful precision. "Visual warping is rare," she said slowly, "but not unheard of. The simulation draws from a blend of your memories, recorded data, and the emotional imprints your mind associates with her. If even one component starts to strain or conflict, the system may produce unexpected imagery." She leaned forward slightly, studying him. "Tell me, David, have you been spending more time in the system than prescribed?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth hung between them, heavy, undeniable, and already far too late to undo. The fire had started in the garage. It was the detail that refused to loosen its grip on him, the one memory that survived every sleepless night. When the world around him felt unsteady, when the apartment walls closed in like a cheap motel room collapsing under the weight of loneliness, this fact remained fixed and unchanging. The garage, the sparks, the smoke crawling across the ceiling like a living thing. He replayed it 1,000 times, trying to catch a moment he might have missed, some small failing that could explain why she never made it out. But memory is a cruel companion. It shows you everything except what you want to see. Sometimes he heard her calling for him, not in the simulation. There, her voice was too clean, too polished by algorithmic precision. In the dark, he heard her as she truly was, a voice trembling with smoke, a child calling her father's name. And every time he heard it, the same truth hit him like a hammer. He hadn't saved her. He'd run into that burning house, blinded by heat and terror, but he hadn't reached her in time. That failure settled in his bones like winter. It followed him to Meridian, to every session, to every carefully rendered replica of her face. And now something else was following him too, something beneath her skin, pushing to the surface, reaching for him through the cracks in the simulation. Whatever it was, he couldn't turn away. He wouldn't. Because if grief was the price of loving her, then he'd already paid it. Now he wanted her back, glitches, shadows, distortions, and all. And he would face whatever waited for him behind that melting face, the way a father always has. Stubborn, desperate, and ready to fight the world if he must. Even if the world was trying to warn him. Even if the world was right. With him every hour, every heartbeat, It was a weight that never lifted, a shadow he could never outrun. He replayed it endlessly, the scent of smoke curling around the banister, the heat licking at the walls, the panic that had sharpened every sound into a scream. Her small hands pressed against the closet door, the closet that should have been safe, and then nothing but silence. That silence became a companion more intimate than any living presence. Now sitting in the meridian chair, head pressed to the haptic sensors, he felt it again. The thin, impossible weight of her presence. Not the perfect construct that the program presented, but something raw and unstable, something writhing beneath the surface of the simulation. Her face, those strawberry blonde curls, the yellow sundress she had begged for, the perfect replica was beginning to shift, melt, ripple in ways it shouldn't. David's chest tightened. His hands clenched the arms of the chair until his knuckles burned. This wasn't a glitch, not a programming error. It was her, or at least something trying to reach through the void that separated them. And he would not look away. Not this time. Not ever again. Every session had been a small rebellion against death itself, but now it demanded more than observation. It demanded intervention. The algorithms, the virtual environment, the safe, controlled recreations, they were no longer enough. The simulation was bleeding, cracking, exposing a truth he couldn't ignore. Grief alone could not hold her here. Something else was stirring beneath the surface, and he had to confront it before it tore the fragile bridge between them apart entirely. David exhaled slowly, letting the tightness in his chest ebb into the room. He leaned forward, closing his eyes, and whispered, "I'll find you. I'll fix this." Not in code, not in memory, not in some sanitized simulation. This time he would face the fire, the smoke, the raw, impossible reality, and he would not fail. Because a father never lets go, not completely, not ever. David froze. Not because of the horror, though the sight of her dissolving face carved terror into him like a blade, but because the voice wasn't coming from the simulation anymore. It was coming from someplace deeper, a place the program could not reach, a place no machine should ever touch. "Please." That last word cracked like a bone. His breath caught. His pulse hammered in his ears. For a moment the room around him, the soft-rendered bedroom walls, the faint citrus smell meridian added to ease emotional strain, folded in on itself. A pressure built in his skull, like the world was shrinking to a single point behind his eyes. "Emma," he whispered. But the figure in front of him was collapsing. Skin sliding, dissolving, peeling away in sheets. Her little hands, once warm, once real, were now dark streaks dripping through his fingers. Her body flickered in and out, like the simulation couldn't decide whether to hold her shape or abandon it entirely. And still she begged. "It hurts, Daddy, make it stop." Something in David broke cleanly. The way glass shatters when struck in just the right place. No hesitation, no fear strong enough to anchor him. Only the primal instinct of a father hearing his child in pain. He reached for her again, even knowing he could not touch her, even knowing she might dissolve entirely if he tried. His hand passed through her chest, and for a heartbeat he felt something cold, wet, and electric. Not code. Not light. Something alive. Then the world convulsed. The floor dissolved under him. The ceiling snapped into 1,000 white fractures, every pixel warped, folding inward like a dying star. He felt pressure behind his eyes, a blinding flash then. Silent. He was no longer in her room. No bed, no pressed flowers, no pastel walls. He was staring at the void behind the simulation. A place of unrendered space, black, endless, pulsing faintly like the inside of a throat. And far ahead, suspended in that impossible dark, was a shape. Small, curled, sobbing. Emma, his voice cracked. The figure lifted its head, and though the darkness hid her features, he could see the tremble of her shoulders, the frantic rise and fall of breath, the smallness of her fear. But beneath that shape, something moved. Slowly, deliberately, like a hand closing around her ankle. David stumbled forward, panic swallowing him. "Emma, don't move, I'm coming." A voice, low, warped, unmistakably not hers, rose from the dark behind her. "You're late again, David." His blood turned to ice. Because the voice wasn't the program. It wasn't a glitch. And it wasn't his imagination. It was a man's voice. Burnt, wet, and horribly familiar. If you'd like, I can continue this exact horror tone, slow burn dread and psychological intensity. David stared at her, stunned that she could misunderstand him so completely. Harm himself. How could he even think about himself when his daughter was burning somewhere inside that machine? "No," he said, but the word came out flat, scraped raw. "I'm not trying to die. I'm trying to save her." "David," Castellano said gently, "Emma didn't survive the fire. What you're experiencing is..." "Don't," his voice cracked like something inside it had snapped. "Don't say her name like that. You weren't there. You didn't hear her." Her expression shifted, still controlled, but with a flicker of alarm. "I'm concerned that you're losing the ability to distinguish." "I'm not confused." His hands were shaking again. "I know what I saw. I know what I heard. She was calling for me. She is in your system. Something went wrong and now she's stuck. Why can't you just admit that?" "Because that's not possible," she said softly. "The lucid environment doesn't store consciousness. It can't trap people. What you saw was a psychological projection." She was screaming. She wasn't real. David stood so fast the chair scraped back and struck the wall. "Then why did I choke?" he demanded. "Why did I smell the burning? Why did I feel it?" Castellanos hesitated, and that hesitation infuriated him. "You're telling me a glitch made me suffocate, made the room catch fire, made her flesh melt?" His voice dropped, low and trembling. "A malfunction doesn't know my house smelled like that. It doesn't know the exact sound she made when she was scared." For the first time, Castellanos looked shaken, not by him, by something she wasn't saying. "David, please sit down," she murmured. "You're in distress." He didn't move. "I'm not in distress," he whispered. "I'm in a countdown. Every minute I'm out here, she's in there burning." "David, I'm not leaving without access." She stood too, slowly, palms raised in a calming gesture. "I can't give it to you, even if I believed every word you're saying, and I want to. Nothing in that system is sentient. Nothing is alive. Whatever you think you heard, it wasn't your daughter." A long silence stretched, and then David said very softly, "Then who was it?" Castellanos froze. Her eyes flicked, not at him this time, but toward the corner of the room, toward the same screen she'd been glancing at earlier. Something she didn't want him to see, something she was terrified he already sensed. She inhaled, slow, controlled. "David," she said carefully, "there have been anomalies in other sessions. It's possible there's a corrupted data cluster. Some residual neural patterns, bursts of cached stimuli that can appear as familiar voices. That's all." He stared at her. "Cached stimuli don't beg for help." She didn't answer. A knock sounded at the door, sharp, urgent. A staff member leaned in, eyes wide, whispering something to her, too fast for David to catch. Castellano's face went pale, truly pale. "Yes," she whispered back. "Shut it down, all of it now." David's blood froze. "What did you shut down?" he asked quietly. But she didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. And in the hollow of that silence, deep inside his skull, far beneath the noise of the room, a faint voice trembled through the static. "Daddy, please, it's dark." He closed his eyes. She was still in there. And she was waiting. David read every post like a starving man tearing into food. Each new account hit with the force of revelation, not because it comforted him, but because it confirmed his deepest fear. He wasn't alone. He wasn't the only one who had heard voices that shouldn't exist, or seen faces break through the digital veil that no code could have generated. Whatever was happening inside the lucid systems, it wasn't a simple malfunction. It wasn't grief, and it wasn't imagination. It was something else. Something the company wasn't acknowledging. Something they were scared of. One user, Gray Thread 42, claimed her husband's avatar had started answering questions she had never asked, referencing memories so private she buried them for years. Another spoke of their daughter appearing with injuries from the day she died, injuries the system was never supposed to replicate. But the one that froze David's blood was a man calling himself the Archivist. He wrote, "If you heard them scream, then it isn't grief. It's compression leakage. They're stuck between snapshots, half in the archive, half in the stream. If you don't pull them out, they deteriorate. Snapshots, archives, words only someone with technical access would know." David messaged him instantly. It took 7 hours for the Archivist to reply. When he finally did, the message was short. "She's not gone. If the system hasn't purged her cluster, she's still recoverable. Send me your session logs." David's pulse hammered. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. But when had shouldn't ever mattered? He uploaded everything. The logs he downloaded from his hidden toolkit, the unauthorized extractor his forum friend had taught him to run, even the corrupted session file containing the moment Emma screamed. A minute passed, then 5, then 12. Finally, another message appeared. "David, there's something in your feed." His hands trembled as he typed back. "What?" The Archivist's response came in a rush, fragmented as if he typed it too fast. "Not an avatar. Not a glitch. Not residual memory. It's a signature. A repeating one. Same displacement pattern every 4 seconds." David's breath thinned. "What does that mean?" The reply came after a long, eerie pause. "It means something in your session was trying to maintain consciousness." David's vision blurred. He read the next line twice, just to believe it. "And it wasn't you." The cold feeling from Castellano's office returned, sharper this time, cutting deeper. He typed it. "Then who?" A final message arrived. One line. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it keeps calling your name." David stopped breathing, because even through the silence of his apartment, deep in the ringing of his ears, he thought he heard it again. A faint whisper barely there. "Daddy, please, don't leave me here." On a recliner that had seen too many bodies and too many stories, staring up at a water-stained ceiling while the technician prepped the tools. The man's hands were steady, but his eyes carried the dull glaze of someone who'd long ago stopped believing in the clean lines between right and wrong. "This'll sting," the technician murmured, and before David could respond, a cold bloom of anesthesia spread under his skin. Not enough to numb everything, just enough to keep him from screaming. He felt the pressure first, then the grinding, then the unmistakable sensation of something foreign sliding beneath the bone behind his ear. "You'll hear clicks for a few days," the man said, voice casual, as if discussing weather. "That's just your brain adjusting to the increased bandwidth." David didn't care. He didn't flinch, didn't even speak. All he saw was Emmeline's face, melting like wax, calling for him across a void she should never have existed in. 30 minutes later, the technician sealed the incision with a cauterizer. The burn sizzled. The smell of cooked flesh rose around them. "You're done," the man announced. "Whatever door you're trying to open, just remember something." David blinked, dazed. "What?" The man paused, leaning close enough that David could see the lines carved into his skin by years of sleepless nights. "Some doors don't lead where you think they do. Some of them don't lead back." David said nothing. He slid off the recliner, swaying only slightly, and handed over the last envelope of cash. The technician didn't count it, just pocketed it and turned away, already calling in the next appointment. Outside, the evening heat wrapped around him like a damp blanket. Ybor City's neon glow pulsed off the wet asphalt, turning puddles into molten pools of red and blue. His head throbbed. Every heartbeat sent a tremor through the fresh incision. But beneath the pain, something else had awakened. A faint vibration behind his ear. A soft clicking, just as the technician warned. And underneath it all, a strange sense of openness, like the world had gained another dimension. David drove home with both hands clenched around the steering wheel, the modified interface box sitting on the passenger seat like a living thing. By the time he reached his apartment, the sky had gone black. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't eat. He didn't rest. He opened the box. Inside, the new haptic rig gleamed with a dark, surgical precision. Sleek, stripped of safety measures, the neuro crown wired with metal filaments that looked too much like veins. A handwritten note lay on top. No timers. No limits. No exits unless you choose them. David swallowed hard. This was it. The threshold. The moment every sane person would walk away from. But sanity hadn't saved Emmeline. Sanity hadn't pulled her from the fire. Sanity hadn't stopped her screams inside the simulation. He fitted the crown onto his skull, each contact point pressing against the tender edges of the incision. A soft hum filled the room. Then, a whisper, not imagined, not remembered, close right beside him. "Daddy." His breath caught. The system hadn't even powered on yet. The whisper came again, trembling, small, impossibly real. "Daddy, please hurry." David closed his eyes, and he connected. And then came the quiet. Not silence, never silence, but the intimate hush of a home holding its breath. The floor beneath his feet wasn't an illusion anymore. It pressed back, the wood warm from sunlight, the faint give of old boards familiar in a way no simulation should ever manage. The walls carried the same subtle scent of dust and lemon cleaner his mother had used. Even the shadows in the corners looked right soft, honest, lived in. This wasn't a memory. This was presence. He moved deeper into the hallway, and every sound, every texture, every whisper of the environment wrapped around him like a living thing. Meridian had never come close to this level of immersion. This was deeper than memory, deeper than dream. This was the place he had been trying to reach ever since the first moment he'd seen Emmeline's distorted face in the glitching void. A bead of sweat slid down his neck. He could feel that too. The air thickened, tightening with the kind of tension you only notice in a place where something terrible has happened but hasn't yet been acknowledged. The cicadas fell quiet. Even the AC seemed to hesitate. He took one step, then another, and at the end of the hall he saw a figure. Small still, half-turned. Emmeline. Not the warped version from the corrupted sessions. Not the melting face. Not the glitching nightmare. This was her as she had been. Hair falling over one shoulder. Head slightly tilted the way she did when she was trying to understand something that frightened her. Emmeline, his voice cracked in the middle. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her chest rose slow, shallow, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to the fragile rise and fall of her breathing. Real, present, here. David stepped forward, but the moment he did, the hallway stretched, lengthening in that impossible, dreamlike way, the floorboards bending the laws of distance as easily as bending light. He froze, because from somewhere behind Emmeline, from deeper in the house than any physical floor plan allowed, he heard it, a low, rhythmic thump. A heartbeat. Not hers. Not his. Something else waiting in the dark, patient and unblinking, like it had known he would come. David swallowed hard. He had wanted answers. Instead, he had found the threshold. And whatever was on the other side was finally aware of him. The breakthrough he kept begging for never came. Instead, the world around him began to thin, like the simulation itself was tiring, struggling to hold together the shape of a little girl who should never have been here in the first place. But Emmeline, she still ran to him every morning. She burst from her bedroom with that breathless joy only children have, flinging herself into his arms with the exact weight, the exact warmth, the exact life she'd had before the fire took her. For a moment, every time, it was perfect. Her hair smelled like strawberries and sunshine and freshly cut grass. Her voice wrapped around him like a memory made flesh. Daddy, and he would break all over again. But the perfection never lasted. Because on the edges of the moment, always just past his line of sight, reality shivered. A smile held too long. A blink that didn't sync with breath. A shadow that arrived a heartbeat too late. And then came the distortions. At first, they were harmless, just a tremble at the corner of her mouth or a stutter in her giggle. Something he could excuse as a connection issue or his own exhaustion. But then the simulations began to peel, like paint blistering under fire. Her features softened, then sagged, then melted. She would reach for him with trembling hands, the tips of her fingers glitching through his shirt like they no longer understood what solid was. Daddy, she whispered one afternoon, voice warping into layers of itself, high and low at once. Why does it hurt? His heart cracked inside his chest. It doesn't hurt, sweetheart. Nothing hurts here, you're safe. Her small hands pressed against her cheeks, except they weren't cheeks anymore. They were shimmering waves of texture flickering between pixels and flesh. Why is it falling off? It's okay. he told her, voice breaking. It's okay, baby, I'm here, I'll fix it. But he couldn't. Sometimes her face rebuilt itself in seconds. Other times it took agonizing minutes, features drifting back like wet paint, struggling to remember what shape a child's face should have. And always in the reconstruction, he saw the fire. He heard it too, crackling in the bursts of static that overtook her voice. Screams stitched into the background noise, a desperate plea woven through the digital hum. Please, Daddy, please wake up, I need you, please. He pressed his forehead to hers, feeling sweat, or was it code, prickling between them? I'm trying, he whispered into a world that wasn't a world. I'm trying to find you, just hold on for me, please. But the deeper he went, the worse it became. The session stretched into days, then blurred into a kind of waking death where reality outside the chair barely mattered. Food lost taste. Time lost traction. His body ached, but none of it felt real compared to the house on Palmetto Drive. Compared to the child who shouldn't exist. He kept searching for a breakthrough. But the breakthrough was not what he thought. Because every glitch, every distortion, every scream stitched into the static was not pulling him closer to Emmeline. It was pulling him closer to something else. Something that had learned to wear his daughter's face. Something that understood he would follow her voice into the dark again and again, as long as she called him Daddy. She sat cross-legged on the blackened carpet, untouched by flame, untouched by heat, untouched by the ruin that had swallowed everything else. The fire crawled up the walls around her like living serpents, hissing and spitting, but it would not cross the invisible circle that kept her whole. She looked exactly 6 years old, exactly the way she'd been before the world ended. But her eyes were wrong. They were too calm, too knowing, too still. She tilted her head as David crawled toward her, his skin blistered, his lungs scorched, his vision swimming in waves of fire and tears. His shoulder hung useless at his side. His hands were raw and peeling, leaving trails of blood on the charred floorboards. Emily, he gasped. She smiled. Not a child's smile, not his daughter's smile. A slow, deliberate curl of the lips, as though she were trying on an expression she had learned from someone else. I knew you'd come, Daddy, she said. Her voice was perfect, sweet, innocent, and layered with something underneath it. A second tone, a deeper one, as if two throats were speaking through one mouth. He reached for her. His hand shook violently as he tried to cup her cheek, needing, desperate, to feel that she was real, that the fire couldn't touch her because she was something preserved, protected, saved. But her skin was cold. Not just cold, empty. The moment his fingers brushed her cheek, her face rippled just slightly, like water disturbed by a fingertip. For an instant, one terrible, blinding instant, he saw something beneath the surface. A lattice of pools in code. A skull that was not a skull. A mouth that stretched far too wide. He jerked his hand back. The fire roared as if reacting to his fear. Baby, what is this? He whispered. She blinked once slowly. Her irises flickered like an image buffering on an unstable connection. Behind her, the air pulsed with static and faintly, so faintly, it sounded like someone screaming from miles away. I've been waiting, she said. You took so long to find me. The sweetness in her voice cracked, glitched, warped. Then softly, too softly. Wake up, Daddy. His breath froze. I am awake, he stammered. Her smile widened, a marionette pulled by unseen strings. No, she said, not yet. The fire behind her surged upward, licking the ceiling, forming shapes. Faces melted, screaming, reaching out with hands made of flame. The whole house groaned, timbers splitting, embers raining down like burning snow. David crawled closer anyway, because he was a father, and fathers go into the fire, even when the fire is lying to them. "Emmeline," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Tell me where you are, please. Tell me how to help you." She leaned forward. The cold radiating from her was sharp enough to cut. Her small fingers touched his burnt cheek, leaving trails of frost on seared flesh. "You already helped me," she said. Her voice dropped to that lower tone, the one that did not belong to any human throat. "You opened the door." The house began to collapse around them, and as the walls folded inward with a monstrous groan, David realized, with a clarity sharp as a knife, that he had not found his daughter. Something else had found him. Emmeline shook her head gently, and the motion carried a weight far beyond childhood, like someone carrying years of sorrow in a body too small to hold it. "No, Daddy," she whispered. "I lived. You're the one who didn't come out." David's breath stuttered. The closet walls grew thinner still, like fog dissolving in sunlight. The fire was completely gone now, nothing but a fading dream he tried to pull back, like smoke slipping through his fingers. "But I held you," he said, trembling. "I saw your face, your skin, the burns." "That wasn't me," she said softly. "That was what you were afraid of. The mind fills in the darkness when it can't face what's real." He tried to stand, but his knees wouldn't obey. The hospital room sharpened in detail, cruelly, unmistakably real. The green glow of monitors, the antiseptic wipe, the hum of machines fighting to keep something barely alive. His body in the bed was a ghost of the man he remembered being. Sunken cheeks, motionless limbs, a ventilator doing the breathing he no longer could. David stared, hollowed out, the truth like a knife slipping beneath every rib. "I've been," his voice faltered. "Emma, I've been talking to you. I've been holding you. How can that be if you're out there?" She squeezed his hand, warm now, alive, no longer digital perfection or glitching pixels. "Because you needed me," she said. "You were trapped in a dream you couldn't wake from. Your mind kept building places for me to meet you. Versions of me, pieces of me, memories of me, sometimes shadows of me." Her voice wavered on that last sentence. The walls between worlds thinned until David could see the nurses moving just outside the room, their silhouettes crossing back and forth. He could hear the rattle of a meal cart, the distant intercom calling a code. "This isn't a simulation, Daddy," Emmeline whispered. "It's the inside of your own mind. You made the program. You made everything you thought you were accessing. The therapy never happened. It was all part of the dream." His breath turned shallow. "That can't be," he said. "The hackers, the chair, the house, the glitches." "All dreams glitch," she said, "especially the ones that try to hold too much pain." He tried to pull his hand back, desperate to ground himself in anything familiar, but she held on. "Emma," he swallowed hard. "Why did you let me think you were scared, that you were burning? Why show me those things?" She looked down. "I didn't," she whispered. "You did." The words struck harder than the fire ever had. "Daddy, you've been carrying what happened that night for so long that your dreams turned it into a cage. You punished yourself over and over because you believed you deserved it." Her voice wavered with a tenderness that broke him. "But I don't want you to stay stuck in here. Not anymore. I want you to come back." "Back," he echoed, his heart spiraling. She nodded, to us, to me, to Mom. His vision blurred as tears welled. I don't know how, he said. You don't need to, she whispered, rising to her feet. You just have to open your eyes. The last of the closet walls dissolved. Only the hospital room remained. The older Emily, 9 now, lifted her head from the book in the real world. She closed it gently and leaned closer to the bed. Her lips moved, forming words he could almost hear. Please wake up, Daddy. The younger version, his dream Emily, smiled at him, fatting around the edges like a photograph left in the sun. It's time, she said. And as she slipped away, the monitors in the real room began to change, their beeps shifting rhythm, rising gently. Like someone after 3 long years, inhaling their first breath on their own. We need to hear your voice one last time. Her words trembled not from fear, but from the weight of a child forced to carry an adult's grief. David felt something inside him shift, something deep, something old, something he had kept locked away behind fire and smoke and denial. He looked at her, really saw her, and for the first time he understood. She wasn't asking him to fight for himself. She was asking him to fight for her. I don't know if I can, he whispered. You can, she said firmly, because you already did once. You ran through fire for me. Now you just have to open your eyes. The world flickered. The hospital walls grew sharp, painfully real. The beep of the heart monitor grew louder. He could hear Ruth gasp softly from the doorway, as if sensing something shifting. Emmeline's dream form shimmered like a reflection on disturbed water. Daddy, her voice softened now, almost breaking. If you stay here, you'll disappear alone. If you wake up, even for a moment, you get to say goodbye with your own voice. You get to leave me with something real. He swallowed, but the lump in his throat only grew thicker. What if waking up hurts? He whispered. It will, she admitted, but not as much as staying here forever. She reached for his hand again, larger, older, no longer the tiny fingers he kept clinging to in his dream. I miss you, she said. Not the you in here, you, the real you, the one sleeping in that bed. He closed his eyes, not to hide, but to gather the courage to let go. The dream around him began to decay, the way burned wood folds into itself. The closet dissolved, the hallway vanished, the digital echoes of his daughter's laughter faded into quiet. And then there was only the hospital room. The dream Emmeline leaned forward, her edges feathering into transparency. I'll be right there when you wake up, she whispered. I promise. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then, a jolt, a pull, a tearing sensation, like being lifted out of deep water after holding his breath for too long. The hospital monitors spiked. In the real world, the 9-year-old Emmeline gasped and stood up so quickly her chair toppled over. Ruth rushed to her side, eyes widening. David's fingers twitched. A small, trembling movement, but real. His eyelids fluttered. Once, twice, the light stabbed into him like a blade, but he forced them open. And there they were. His daughter, older, changed, real, standing at his bedside, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daddy, she whispered, voice cracking. David swallowed, the first voluntary movement his body had made in 3 years. Every muscle ached. His throat felt like sand, but he pushed through. And with all the strength he had left, he formed the only words that mattered. I'm here, baby girl. Emmeline's sob broke into a laugh, raw, disbelieving, joyous. Ruth covered her mouth, tears streaming. David's chest rose in one shaky breath. One last breath. He looked at his daughter, the real one, and managed the smallest smile. "I love you," he whispered. The heart monitor leveled into a steady tone. Soft, unbroken, final. His eyes closed. Not into a dream this time, but into peace. And for the first time in 3 years, the world outside the fire began to heal. And beneath all that overwhelming relief, something steadier settled into him. Quiet, warm, and painfully final. Peace. For the first time since the fire, he wasn't running. He wasn't searching for a door, or fighting shadows built from guilt, or trying to rewrite the past into a version where he was the hero instead of the man who survived by accident. He was simply here. Here, where the air hummed with machines that had worked harder than he ever knew. Here, where his daughter's small hand anchored him more firmly than any tube or wire. Here, where Ruth stood in the corner, tears silently carving lines down cheeks that had learned to endure 3 years of waiting and 3 years of almost giving up. David breathed slowly, carefully, like someone relearning an old ritual. Emily leaned closer, her little fingers brushing his cheek, as if afraid he'd fade again if she blinked. "You came back," she whispered. "You really came back." He swallowed, feeling the raw burn of a throat that hadn't spoken in years. I couldn't leave," he rasped, "not without seeing you." Her smile trembled. "Then don't leave again." He wanted to promise. God, he wanted to promise forever. He wanted to swear he'd watch her grow up, that he'd be there for every scraped knee, every school project, every heartbreak. But the doctor's hushed voices at the edge of the room told a harder truth. His body was failing. His time was borrowed. Still, he had come back. Even if this moment was all he had left, it was real. It mattered. It was enough. David let his eyes linger on Emily's face, the freckles he'd never seen form, the shape of her smile that had slowly shifted from baby roundness to something older, something braver. "Emily," he whispered, voice thin but steady, "I am so proud of you, so proud." She pressed her forehead to his hand, her shoulders shaking with quiet relief. "I missed you, Daddy. I missed you more than you'll ever know." The monitors beeped softly. A nurse wiped her eyes and pretended she was. Ruth stepped closer, laying a tentative hand over his arm, a touch full of years of grief, love, and everything in between. Emily leaned in again, her voice small but sure. "We're here, Daddy. We've been here the whole time. You didn't die alone. You didn't leave us alone." David closed his eyes, not drifting away, but simply resting in the truth he had run from for so long. He wasn't alone. He had found his way back for her, for this, for goodbye, or maybe for one last beginning. And as the room settled into a quiet, sacred stillness, the impossible weight that had crushed his mind for 3 years finally lifted. Peace didn't feel like surrender. It felt like coming home. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words scraped thin by a throat that had forgotten how to speak. "I'm sorry for leaving, for not being there." "You're here now." Emmeline's voice was trembling but fierce. "You're here now, and that's what matters." The door opened. Ruth stood in the doorway, her face a landscape of exhaustion, shock, and years of unspoken grief. She stared at him, at the impossible sight of his open eyes, at the machines keeping him alive, at their daughter holding his hand. For a long moment, no one spoke. "Ruth," his voice cracked on her name. "You selfish, selfish man. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she moved toward him, half running, half hesitating, as if afraid he would vanish again. 3 years. 3 years I sat here talking to you, begging you to wake up, and you pick now. I'm sorry. You should be. She stopped beside Emmeline, her hand settling protectively on their daughter's shoulder. You missed everything. Her first day of 3rd grade, her first lost tooth, her first. Her voice crumbled. You missed everything, David. I know. His eyes locked onto hers with an honesty earned too late. I know I can't fix any of it. I know waking up doesn't erase what I missed, but I'm here. I came back. For her. For you. For. His chest seized mid-sentence. A pain unlike anything he'd ever felt ripped through him. Raw, real, unforgiving. Not like the artificial fire his mind had fabricated. This was deeper, final. The monitors erupted in a shrill alarm. Suddenly the room was full, voices shouting, bodies moving, machines blaring. Ruth pulled Emmeline against her, shielding her as doctors swarmed the bed. What's happening? Emmeline cried, her voice sharp with terror. What's wrong with him? Heart failure, Dr. Hendricks answered, working frantically. His system can't handle the stress of waking after this long. Do something, Ruth sobbed. He just woke up. You have to do something. We're trying, but the damage is too extensive. David stopped listening. The voices blurred into a distant hum. The pain dimmed. The edges of the world softened. Everything fell away except 2 faces, his wife and daughter, pressed together against the wall, holding each other, watching him slip away. He tried to speak, tried to tell them something meaningful, something worthy of a final moment, but his voice had already abandoned him. His lungs refused to fill. His heart stuttered. His last sight was Emmeline's face, tear-streaked, beautiful, older than her years. Her expression was grief and heartbreak and something like gratitude. You came back, her eyes said. Even if just for a moment, you came back. The world went white. Epilogue. The funeral was small, quiet, held at a cemetery in Temple Terrace where Ruth's parents rested. Emmeline stood between her mother and grandmother, wearing a black dress a size too large, watching strangers lower her father into the ground. The minister spoke of peace and eternity, but she barely heard a word. She was thinking of those last 10 minutes, of his eyes searching a room full of chaos just to find her, of the way his hand felt in hers, weak but real, of his voice cracked and ruined, whispering, I heard you. He had come back. Not for long. Barely 10 minutes, the doctor said. But long enough. Long enough to know she was alive. Long enough to know she had grown. Long enough to know she was okay. And that had to count for something. She needed it too. After the burial, after the casseroles and condolences, after Ruth finally lay down in her childhood bedroom to cry in private, Emmeline slipped into the yard. She found a quiet place beneath the live oaks, roots twisting like old hands, and sat. The battered copy of Charlotte's Web rested in her lap, its spine cracked from years of being carried to a quiet hospital room. She opened to the last chapter, the one she had never been able to finish while sitting beside her father's silent body. Finishing had always felt like closing a door she wasn't ready to close. Now she was ready. Her voice wavered, but she read the final lines anyway. The ones about Charlotte being in a class by herself, about friendships that shape a life. When she finished, she pressed the book to her chest. I finished it, she whispered to the air, the trees, the fading light. I finally finished it, Daddy. A breeze moved through the live oaks, lifting the Spanish moss like a gentle breath. A mockingbird called in the distance, stitching together borrowed songs. The sky dimmed to soft gold, gardenia colored, like the blooms from their old yard on Palmetto Drive. Emmeline stayed until the first stars appeared, until her mother found her, until 3 years of grief cracked open inside her and finally spilled out. And when the tears were done, when Ruth held her close and they walked back to the house together, Emmeline felt something she hadn't felt since the night of the fire. She felt lighter. The story was over. Her father had written himself an ending, messy, tragic, full of guilt and love and misguided heroism. But in the final chapter, he found his way back to her. Not to save her, not to rewrite the past, but simply to see her, to hear her, to know that she had survived. And now she could let him go. She placed Charlotte's Web on her grandmother's shelf, between an old dictionary and a row of Nancy Drew books, its job finally done. A small memorial, a quiet promise, a reminder of a man who fought a private battle for 3 long years, and who, in the end, found the strength to wake up long enough to say goodbye. And for Emmeline, that was enough.